Hey guys, Mrs. Blackburn here. I'm just hanging out in my backyard on this beautiful Monday, and we are getting ready to start a new unit on life science or biology. And so I thought to get us started, I would show you my little backyard garden, and we would talk about some things that we're going to discuss later on. So let's go. So welcome to my super simple back deck container garden that I have here. And as you can see, I just have some pots that I'm growing some vegetables in for later. And so the first one here, I've got some cherry tomatoes that are sprouting up nicely. I started everything from seeds, so they're still very tiny. I've got some green beans that are doing super well right now, as you can see. And I've got my little trellis that they're gonna hang on to when they start growing up bigger and climbing on there. I've got some cucumbers. And I've got some lettuce and a different type of lettuce. Actually, I have two types of lettuce here. And then I've just got some random things. I've got some radishes in here and just some different herbs there. So, as you can see, I don't have a super complicated garden, and I put all of these in a container. And over here on my patio, I have some more things that I've planted. I've got a nice row of radishes here in the middle that's doing really well. And I've also got some kale and some chives. And I even have a little banana pepper plant that's just now starting to sprout up on this side. So I've got a lot of things planted in containers here. And this is why I wanted to make this video, because when I planted all these seeds in their containers, I was actually making little tiny ecosystems for each set of plants. So while we're on the topic of ecosystems, and while we're outside on this pretty kind of windy day, let's go around my backyard and let's talk about what makes an ecosystem. An ecosystem is basically all of the living and non-living things that are in one place at one time, and they will all have an effect on each other. So I'm going to go around in my backyard, and we're just going to look for some living and non-living things in my backyard and see what makes up my ecosystem. Now you can do this at home too, with parents' permission of course. And you can go around and look at some of the living and non-living things that you can find that would have an effect on each other. Now we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into that topic later, but right now we just need to see what's out there. You may even have some big trees in your backyard. Over here by my creek, I've got some really nice big trees. They must have been here for lots and lots of years. So big trees, obviously living things that make up an ecosystem. Something else kind of interesting that I found as I got closer and closer to the creek where it's damp, you might be able to see some moss down here. Okay, so we've got some smaller plants, smaller vegetation, this nice moss over here, really soft. These are things that we don't usually think about when we think of an ecosystem. We usually think of these big animals and big plants, but even tiny things like moss are part of the ecosystem. Let's go see if we can find some living animals in my ecosystem. Something kind of interesting, look at these little guys. These little red bugs that I found on my blue shed over here. Super tiny. I would never have noticed them if I weren't looking for living things today. Have to look that up and figure out what these little guys are. Some more little critters that I found in my backyard ecosystem. I've got some little roly-poly bugs. Some more earthworms. Look at this guy, he's a big one. And if you can see, there they are. Look at this little guy, I think those are cute. Some of you probably don't think they're cute. Look at that centipede. He's kind of wicked looking, isn't he? Look at that. Super cool. These guys do some really cool things for the soil, which we'll talk about later. Part of my backyard ecosystem is also my cat. This is Ray. She's running away from me. Apparently I wouldn't make a very good wildlife photographer for National Geographic or anything. For cool here in my creek, you see some shelf fungus on this little log. That's another thing that's part of this ecosystem. A fungus is a living thing as well. So we've talked about some of the living things that we've seen as far as some of the little bugs, the little critters, a lot of those plants we saw. Now, those are called biotic factors in an ecosystem, bio meaning life. So all of those living things that we just looked at, plus way more that we couldn't even see today, are part of the biotic factors that are in my little backyard ecosystem. So what about abiotic factors? Now, abiotic factors are non-living things that are still going to have an effect on an ecosystem. So let's look and see if we can find some non-living things that are going to have an effect on the living things that live back here in my backyard. Remember this little rock that I had turned over earlier to find all the bugs under it? That would be a non-living thing that's going to have an effect on my ecosystem. So remember how I told you that I live next to a creek? Here is the creek behind my house. See all that water? The water is part of my backyard ecosystem. As you saw earlier, there's a lot of moss that was growing around. And the reason why that can grow around is because of the moisture out here, because of the creek. The reason why you see some of these plants over here on the bank that you see are because of the water from the creek. Also, there are lots of little critters that live in this creek that can be affected by that abiotic factor, the water, which is non-living, that's over here. And as you can see as well, there are lots of little rocks, okay? These are also abiotic factors in my backyard ecosystem. So a lot of these non-living things that we've been talking about have been natural non-living things, but I do have to admit that there is one thing that is non-living that's in my ecosystem that will have an effect on it, and that is right behind me, my house. So the place that we live, the things that we build as humans, also do have an effect on our local ecosystems. So today we talked about a few things. We talked about how an ecosystem is made up of living and non-living things. Those living things are called biotic factors, and the non-living things are called abiotic factors. And we know that the living and non-living things in an ecosystem have effects on each other. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. I'm so glad that you got to join me and visit my backyard, and I encourage you to get outside and discover and explore a little bit of your own backyard, because it will make you love life science even more. Until next time, see you later.